We'll be looking at a concept called as composition. So we have learned in the last week how to write a class, how to define members, how to define properties, and actually have methods. We have also seen how to create objects from the classes. So this is going to be building off of that concept. So let me show you what I want to do. So let us say that we have person, a blueprint for a person. So let us think about some of the attributes the person will have. They will have first name. They will have last name. They will have date of birth. So we have first name, last name, date of birth, social security number. Could be another one. Then they also have address. Then they have email. And they have phone number. So these are all some of the attributes that define a person, or rather, these are some of the attributes or features that we would think about if we collect information about a person. So first name, last name, date of birth, social security, address, email, and phone number. If you look at all of these, this is a simple string. So these two are going to be string. Social security is also a string. Email and phone number. So these can all be string. So, but this guy, date of birth, is going to be a data type called date time. It is a built-in data type that we get with C#. So address, let's look at address. Address is a little more complicated because if you think about address by itself, usually we have address line 1, then we have address line 2, then we have city, state, and zip. So it is not a simple field. Address is a much more complicated field. Okay. So address is a much more complicated field. So it can actually be its own class. So what we are looking at here is a person class has an address, a person object can have an address object. So if we think about a person, if his name, if there is a person called Tim, so Tim is going to have his own address right in there. So this is going to be the address. And it is an object. It is not a simple field, it's an object. Similarly, if we have Jane, she will have her own address. So instead of just thinking about it as simple fields, which is straightforward, we have string, integer, double, boolean, so on and so forth. In this situation, it gets complicated. So these are address fields, and they are more complicated because it is not just like one simple string or one simple integer or bool. It is much more complicated. So this is called as composition, when one object contains another object, or when one class contains a reference to another class. That is called as composition. I will post a picture of these whiteboard little diagrams in your Blackboard coursework, so you can take a look. So let's go to this week 12 demo. So I want to create a person class, and I want to create an address class. when one of the fields get really complicated and has a lot more than just a straightforward data type, it can become its own class. And that when you have a reference like that, we call that as composition. So first, let's create a person class. So this is an auto-implemented property. And we use auto-implemented properties when there is not any special validation for those fields. Email, phone number. Okay, this cannot be string. This has to be date time. That is the data type. So we got first name, last name, date of birth, social security, email, phone number. The only thing missing is address. So we got all these as string, date of birth is date time, and we are not doing the address at this point. So we'll hold off on that. So I've created them all as auto-implemented property initially. Let's create a constructor. The constructor shares the same name as the class. Let's create a default constructor that takes no parameters. So here we can say first name is equal to string.empty. So when you say string.empty, it returns a blank string. It's a much better way than to say it's the same, but it's a much better way to use this kind of predefined constant. Then we have last name. So I want to initialize that to string. I want to set just these two fields, social security. So constructor with here, let's pass first name. So here we are passing 3 arguments. So when you pass an argument, you have to set that. Okay. If we call the person like this, then we will give the 3 arguments. Let's see, what am I missing? Okay. There you go. So this is a very simple class. Let's test what we've written so far. So from my program.cs, I'm going to be saying person P1 new person. So this is calling. So now you can see there are two constructors available. Whichever one you want, you can use. So let's use the default constructor. Then for person 2, you can use the other. So this is calling the default constructor. This is calling the 3-argument constructor. Both are creating a person. This will have like first name, last name is empty, and this will have the actual name set. Let's write one method called intro. So a void method will not return any value. And this is not taking any parameters also. And the reason being, we already know what we want to display here. This method can access all of these guys and display them. So that's what this method is doing. So I don't want to display the social security number because it's a privacy issue. So let us say nobody should access social security. You would make it as a private property and only manipulate it here. So for now, let's leave it this way and then test this. Let's make a call and see what the values are. So here's my code. You can see the first one does not have first name, last name. They are set as string.empty. So there's nothing coming up for person 1. For person 2, whatever parameter we sent, so they have been received and then they are displaying. Okay, so this is just a quick person class. Let us see how to include the address in there. So for this, let's create another class called address. So my address class should have address 1, address 2. So address 1 is address line 1, address line 2, city, state, zip. I'm setting them all as auto implemented properties to begin with. We can always change it as we go. So let's create two constructors. One is the default constructor that takes no parameters. So I'm just going to set state is nothing, zip code, okay, it's zip. Let's do one where they provide everything to us. In this case, we would just set address line 1 equal to addr1. So we just took these arguments, and then these are getting the value from the call from where we are calling it, and then we are setting it to all of these property values. And these property in turn will set the hidden member variables that are automatically created. That is why we call them as auto-implemented properties. So we created address. Okay, I just deleted the method I tried creating. I put it in the wrong place. So this is my my class. My class has two constructors, and then there are some auto-implemented properties, the address class. Now let's go to our person. So our person class should also have an address, right? So let's say here, address, that's the type of our variable, permanent address. Okay, so let's declare that here. So the person object will have address object inside. So that is the beauty of this composition. So how do we manage this? So I want to keep this private. So this is not public. Remember that this is private. I want to only manipulate this inside the class. I don't want it to be available outside the class. So let us say, let us expose a function called setAddress. So if somebody gives me address 1, address 2, and all that, then I'll be able to set the address. So that's the idea of this function, the method. So before that, let's think about it. Every time a person object gets created, address object should also get created. So I have to put it in these two constructors. So I would say permanent address equal to new address. Without this, you will get an error. So you need this line. Anytime you create a new object, it has to be defined by the new keyword. So here we will go and say set address. So if we get a call saying set the address, then we can say address line 1 equal to So this method, because we are hiding a permanent address from being accessible outside, you can do it this way so that this class is going to manage how the address is set. So this is one way of doing it. The other way is you could take a constructor, another constructor, that takes all these arguments and you could actually pass it here. So the reason is there are two constructors that are available inside address class. One takes 0 parameters, one takes all the required fields in there. So you could actually invoke that from your 3 argument. So you can create, this is going to be where it calls the address constructor with 0 parameters because we don't have the data. But here you can call this guy when you can call the constructor that has that's taking all these parameters if you have the data. So it's up to you how you want to do it. Or if you don't want to do it at that time, but you want to like provide an option later, then we can do it this way. There are so many ways you can do that. So let's test this. So whenever we test this, I would like to test it separately. So let's hold on to the person one. Let's try the address. Let's create address separately. Address can be created separately. Test each class separately. So here there is no parameter. Here I'm going to have all the parameters. So if you pass like this, then it's going to set all the information for address one. Here it will set them to the state to not applicable and then the zip code to zeros. So let us say we want to set it for this person. Let's move the person information down below. So here you would go and say P1 dot permanent address. Oh yeah, we can't access that. See, P1 dot. So permanent address doesn't show up here because it is managed internally. The only thing you can access from outside is set address. So here you can give this is the only way we can set because address is hidden. So if you directly use address, then all the information is available because it's an open class. But if you want to access the address of this person, you have to only use the set address method. Let's run this code. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So if you look at my address, Okay, I just added a couple more breakpoints so we can step through and see what's going on. So when I go into new address, let's step in here. If you look up top here, you can see this little arrow. Step into is F11. Click on that. It'll go into the address constructor. So it goes into the constructor that takes no, there is no argument in this. So it takes that. So it sets state to not applicable and zip to all zeros. Let's try this one. This one is using the 5 parameter constructor. So let's go to that one. See, it comes here. So all the information I'm sending from program.cs are going to be available here. So you can see address 1 has that address, line 1. Address 2. You just click on that. You can hover over and see like what the value is. Okay, now we are coming into the person class, person.setAddress. So let's step in. First, let's hover over permanent address. You can see that permanent address is properly set. If you did not do the new here, like new address, like this one, you will get an error right here. It will tell you that the object is null. In our case, the object is not null because we defined it already. So now if I do that, it will set the person's address to the value we passed. So, and then it went through the whole program. So this is one way when your data is complicated, you can use composition to be able to call one object inside the other. The person class calls address class. So a person, when you create a person object, inside the person object, there will be an object that contains the address also. So that is what is called as